Well, thank you for joining this session of the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Center webinar series, presented to you by the National AgrAbility Project. It's Paul Jones. I manage the National AgrAbility Project, which is headquartered at Purdue University. And our topic today is agricultural stress, resiliency, and mental wellness, a Nevada case study. Our presenters, Brenda Freeman and Lindsay Chichester from the University of Nevada, Reno. For those who are not familiar with the USDA Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network, commonly known as FARSAN, it is supported through the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. It was first established through the 2008 Farm Bill. And its goal is to provide stress assistance to those engaged in agriculture. And to do so, there are 4 regional FARSAN centers across the United States that cover all U.S. states and territories. If you'd like basic contact information about those centers, you can go to agrability.info/FARSAN. For those who are not familiar with AgrAbility, we are, again, sponsored by the USDA under the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And our focus is on helping basically anybody in agriculture with virtually any type of disability or functional limitation. Currently, there are 21 state projects around the country. Every one of them is a partnership between a land-grant university and at least one nonprofit disability services organization. Again, there is one national AgrAbility project, and that's at Purdue University, Breaking New Ground Resource Center. And our partners on that grant include Goodwill of the Finger Lakes, Osteoarthritis Action Alliance, AgriSafe Network, Colorado State University, and Washington State University. You can find out much more about AgrAbility at agrability.org. You can view over 160 of our archived webinars on that site. We appreciate our presenters being with us today. Dr. Brenda Freeman is professor, University of Nevada Counselor Education, and University of Nevada Reno Extension mental health specialist. Dr. Freeman holds an undergraduate degree in fine arts education from Boise State University, an MS degree in counseling from Emporia State University, and a Ph.D. in counselor education from the University of Wyoming. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor with experience in clinical counseling, international student counseling, grief and loss counseling, and program evaluation consultation with American Indian Alaska Native programs. Dr. Lindsay Chichester is an associate professor, University of Nevada Reno Extension. Dr. Chichester grew up on a cattle and sheep ranch. She attended West Texas A&M University, where she obtained an MS in animal science, an MA in speech communication, and a Ph.D. in systems agriculture. Her extension focus has been on youth livestock quality assurance, meat animal quality, and beekeeping programs. This time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let our presenters take over for the body of the presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. Thank you again for the kind introduction. My name is Brenda Freeman, and I grew up in a small town of 300 in Idaho, a farm town, and I come from a homesteader family and a miner family, and I'm first generation educated, and I am a 4-H'er and a master gardener, and was delighted when I was able to get a split contract between counseling and extension at the University of Nevada, Reno, because it allows me to do work like what we're doing today. Lindsay, would you like to augment your introduction in any way?
Sure. So Brenda and I started working together several years ago because we knew that the agriculture population had a lot of stress, the resiliency to just living in this lifestyle. And so from our backgrounds, I was heavily ag. Brenda heavily works more in the counseling, mental health space, but combined, we tend to work really well together and rely on each other's strengths. So that's kind of how our duo came to be.
Okay. Well, our objectives today are really what we'd like to do is we're in the WRASAP group, which is the Western Agriculture Producer Group. And so we'd like to share a little bit about the voices of the ag producers in the West and how they've managed to have grit and resiliency in the face of some pretty difficult stressors and external demands. And then would also like to give you a little bit of a lens of the Nevada farmers and ranchers. The publication of the material that we're talking about today is found at this website, and we can also put that in the chat box if you're interested in reading more about this work. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. Okay, so our goals, we wanted to augment, we did a quantitative survey, the people from WRSAP in the baseline data collection group, which included Colorado State and Montana State and University of Nevada. We did a quantitative survey, and the baseline survey was mostly focused on deficit-based work, such as the types of stressors, the preferred resources, and the delivery systems, and the kind of mental health issues that they were facing. So we wanted to do the qualitative part of the study, which we're talking about today, on the half full glass. We wanted to look at stories of resiliency so that we could learn more about the mechanisms that producers use to survive and thrive through their various external stressors. So we already knew from the quantitative data what some of those stressors were, but we wanted to have a deeper level of understanding of the resiliency factors. And we were aware that the suicide rate for farmers and ranchers was 6 times the national average, but we also saw evidence of some incredible resilience in the population. So we started with this question, well, what actually is resiliency? I mean, what does that word mean? And it's complicated because in the literature, we found farm resiliency, which was about financial and strategic planning for the ranch, individual and plant and animal resiliency, like surviving diseases, environmental resilience, surviving harsh environmental conditions, farm system resiliency, trait resiliency, which is more psychological literature about farmer and rancher traits associated with the concept of bouncing back from a trauma or an event. And then we leaned more into occupational resiliency, which was individual farmer rancher traits interacting with the context of agriculture. So the definition that we were most interested in wasn't the bounce back theory, which was the idea that you have a problem, you adapt to the problem, and then you bounce back where you were. What we found in our ag producers is that instead of bouncing back, they actually transformed. They learned through problem solving, they learned. And so occupational resiliency then is the interaction between the individual and agricultural life. So our methods and participants, and I won't go too deeply into this, but essentially, on average, they worked 27 years in the field. They were from 14 states, Western states and territories. 52.1% were male, 53 years old on average, with a range of 26 to 75, mostly a white sample, with about 33% high school, 33% BA level, and 33% master's level of education. We did interviews, qualitative interviews that were recorded with 51 producers. They ran from 30 minutes to 1 hour. Actually, some of them ran about 90 minutes. They were recorded and transcribed through a program called Rev, and then we analyzed them on in vivo using a phenomenological analysis approach. We had 3 graduate assistants who helped us with that. We ran inter-rater reliability statistics on it, and then I did the second level coding, and we used 2 expert panels who revised the initial themes to make sure that we had some good reliability. So in terms of our findings, okay, we were interested in the lived experiences. And so we did not lean into theory building, nor did we try to generalize to non-participants. This is qualitative research, so we weren't trying to say that this is how it is for all producers in the large Western United States. We were just trying to analyze the stories of the lived experiences of those that we interviewed. So we weren't into theory. We built a model based on their experiences, but we weren't trying to do theory building per se. Okay, I only put this one in because I was tying in, this is the one that's in our publication, but the one I'd like to talk about today is this one, and Lindsay and I are going to talk about these 4 themes, and I'm going to do the first one, and she's going to do this the next 2, and then I'll do the last one. So basically, we found 4 themes with sub-themes around each theme. And so the first theme was agricultural life. And so that you might think about that in terms of the context of agriculture, if you want to look at the agricultural life as an occupation, or if you want to look at it as a lifestyle. But we found that co-working with family, multi-generational farming, and the work schedule control and the work-home balance were issues that were part and parcel with agricultural life. And Lindsay will read you some of those quotes and talk about that a little bit more. Then upon that base of understanding that that's the context, we had these external stressors that would be introduced. And it'd be interesting to find out what the external stressors in your part of the world, your part of the country are, and what this study would have looked like in your area. We found that so external stressors would be defined as sources of adversity that are beyond the total control of the individual that trigger the need to adapt or cope. That's how we defined external stressors. So they're adversity that, in stress management, that control is a big issue. That when we do better in terms of stress, if we have some degree of a sense of control over it, and many of these external stressors, you have little control over them. And so that adds to the stress element with that type of adversity. So, but then you have to adapt to them anyway, even though you don't feel like you have a lot of control. So the ones that were predominant in our data set were agricultural policies, financial and economic conditions, and physical environment type external stressors. So you've got this lifestyle, the context, then you introduce external stressors, and then you come to the individual and the traits and the adaptations around the individual in terms of how you then cope or manage these external adversities. So we defined traits and adaptations as the characteristics and adaptive processes used to respond to the adversities. Okay, and so the ones that were predominant in our data set were planning and problem-solving skills, optimism, persistence and work ethic, that says worth, that's a typo, sentiment for farming and ranching life, how they felt about the emotional sentiment they felt about farming and ranching lifestyle. Okay, and then we get to one that's near and dear to the heart of Extension, Farm Bureau, and other organizations, which is the final area, supports and resources. So sources of external assistance potentially available to brace producers during adversity. Okay, and so Lindsay will speak with you more about these sub-themes, but they were agriculture-specific resources, medical and mental health resources, family, neighbor, and community resources. So looking at the first theme, the context of agriculture life, then, Lindsay?
Okay, so as Brenda mentioned, one of the things that we saw pop up pretty regularly is, as you know, if you're involved in agriculture, co-working with family and the dynamics that brings, whether it is multi-generational experiences or, multiple siblings. So there's a lot of dynamics surrounded around working in a profession that you work with your family. And so the quotes here are direct quotes from the interviews that were conducted. And people talk about it goes beyond the physical. You know, you can get over a broken bone or an injury, but when your family hurts your feelings, it becomes different. It's hard when you've got those family issues at play, but then you're also tied together financially. So the dynamics continue just to get a little more challenging when your livelihood depends on it, but there's some other tension at play there. And then there was another quote from someone that was in agriculture from Alaska. And so they just talked about the remoteness of it. And since they're pretty isolated, they've got all the environmental factors that we mentioned, earthquakes, volcanoes, snowstorms. They see the ups and downs, but at the end of the day, they pretty much just have to rely on each other. So it's them and their adult children in this case. And so, you know, not only are these people your family, but they're also a major support system.
One of the issues with co-working with family in the data set was that it played both ways. That co-working with family could be a real strength, but it could also be a negative issue around resilience. Lindsay, I think you're muted.
I am muted. I don't know how that happened. So multi-generational, and this again has pros and cons. So for example, on our family's ranch, my sister and I are the fourth generation, and we don't necessarily help in the day-to-day, but it is there, and it is different when you start having children and grandchildren, and you do want to keep that in the family. I know we talk a lot in the West about sustainability and how that looks different from a environmental perspective, but also the sustainability to keep it multi-generational and going, and to set up those agriculture lands, whether it's a farm or ranch, in that capacity. And then they also talked about some of the challenges. I don't know if any of you are specifically working in like succession plans or anything like that, but as this person in the bottom quote alludes to, that as there's advances made in technology and research and how things are done, it can be a real rough spot for people too if someone's a little more, in this case he says old school versus new school, and just some debt around that. And so you know, it starts to create some real tensions. And in this place, he talked about the struggle he had and the potential of thinking about suicide, and his dad's contribution to that with some of those multi-generational family dynamics.
In my family, we're having issues right now with our homestead because the next generation, those that are more urban, have a different feeling about the homestead than those that are more rural in the next generation. And so it's amazing the push and pull that's happening there.
And then of course there's the, you know, the work schedule and the work home balance. When you're working on the same place that you are living, you don't really get a break. You're on call 24/7 all the time. So the first quote, they're talking about checking cows. I'm assuming this is during a calving season, but you're there, you're checking, making sure everything's going okay. And then this person had to balance a town job as well. So, you know, you're just running yourself ragged, working these two schedules. And then just life happens. You know, you obviously we can't ever plan anything in agriculture to a certain extent. And they're talking about they're doing a home repair project on a fireplace, but then an animal has an issue, so they have to drop everything, go take care of the animal, and you know, then the fireplace project gets a little bit neglected. So it seems like, you know, when you're working, it's hard to relax because something always pops up. There's always something. It's hard to actually get a break. If any of you in agriculture have ever thought about taking a vacation, you know how challenging that can be as you're, you know, potentially working on animal caregivers coming over, teaching them and training them about what needs to happen, making sure all that's in place. So it's just a lot to balance, and home work, living where you work in those spaces as well.
Okay, so theme 2 then, so on top of those lifestyle context are then the external stressors that come into play. So agriculture policies, this is interesting. This first quote, that was when all of a sudden what I call death by 1,000 cuts began. Suddenly we were supposed to register ourselves as this and sign up for that and fill out this form and pay this particular fee and get this handler's license and then that handler's license. You can just feel the frustration of the extra controls and the policies, and then in the next quote they're talking about the local farming movement got the attention of the regulatory authorities and the Food Safety Modernization Act. And so some frustrations around agriculture policies that are totally outside of the control of the individual, but that impacted them in terms of their work. Financial economic was a theme that I would be surprised if that wouldn't be a theme in your part of the country as well. I'm working more hours for less money every day. And then this individual's talking about how apples were financially very devastating. And they discussed that. And then this last one, there was discussion that if you don't inherit your ranch or farm, you're never going to make it in ranching and farming if it's not inherited. And this person indicated, I didn't inherit a ranch. I actually bought one. I financed 80% of my ranch. So the finances have been nip and tuck. So they go on to discuss that issue and the financial and economic stressors. And then physical environmental issues in our quantitative survey, drought and wildfire and predators were among the top. The urban rural interface, those kinds of issues were among the top stressors in the quantitative survey. And so here they're talking about peach skin discoloration in this particular qualitative interview. And well, I'm going to be out of the cow business pretty quick here if we don't get some water. It's pretty traumatic. It's ending a 40-year experience because of climate and lack of water. So physical and environmental. Lindsay, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously, as we in the West, we see a lot of droughts and excessive wildfire and smoke. All of those things contribute not only to issues that agriculture is facing, but people's morale. When it's smoky and settles in here in the West for months on end, as you guys know, it eventually gets your direction and blows that way. But it really takes a toll on people's attitudes. It blocks the sun. So a production standpoint, it interferes with reproduction in animals. There's just a lot of challenges that we see because of it. And then at the other end, we get a ton of flooding and, it's either a feast or famine mode that a lot of people face in agriculture, and drought in the Western region is certainly a challenging aspect.
And so now with theme 3, we're leaning more into resiliency. So we've got the context and we have some of the external triggers and stressors. And so now we're saying, how do you get through this? What are some of the traits and the adaptation methods? And so planning and problem solving were really important. I learned things that I would absolutely not have known if the situation hadn't occurred. Some of the livestock I had brought into the herd, even at a young age, showed multiple spots of cancers. So it goes on to say that changed my behavior moving forward. Okay, so learning from experience, transformation through learning. And then this one, I'm an over planner. I plan, then I check the facts. I consult with others. And so, trying to plan and then check the plans. So planning and problem solving. Optimism. I remain optimistic when I talk to other people, when we do our farm tours, and they just go, how do you do this? I say, it's my nature to be optimistic. So that optimism was just amazing in in this group. It came up in almost every interview, the importance of staying positive and having an optimistic attitude. And persistence and work ethic. You just push, even though you don't feel like doing it. You got to get up and do it. So this combination of unable to accept defeat. You're like, no, we had a rough go, but we're going to make this right. We're going to make everything work. So I did a word count, and stubborn came up in the data set. I've forgotten what the actual word count was on the word stubborn, but a lot of people referred to themselves as stubborn. And then I loved the quotes on sentiment for a farming, ranching life. There's something in me that I don't want to leave this life. I don't know why. There's something so peaceful and kind of real about working in dirt, water, and sun. I bought a piece of land that's been practically abused for 40 years. I'm bringing it back to life, aerating it, putting plants on it, bringing the soil back. I've also become a wildlife habitat for monarchs and pollinators, just giving the land a chance to be what it's meant to be, and that gives me a great deal of pleasure. But the last one is more in the more negative sentiment. The big thing that people don't understand is that we're losing farmers every day. We're losing them to suicide, but we don't see that because farmers can make suicide look like an accident. I had a father who dealt with huge depression issues, farmed his whole life. He was just absolutely beaten down. I'm looking at trying to do less to get my mental health and my physical health back around. So sentiment, positive or negative, for farm ranch life influences, we found in our data, it influences resilience. And then this is just a chart that we noted about the planning approach: optimism, persistence, work ethic, engaging in ongoing planning, implementing the plans when there is external drought, then looking at the factors outside of the control, kicking those plans in, going into problem solving, transforming, using that to make temporary adaptations, embracing new operational approaches. Okay, Lindsay.
Okay, so our last theme were the supports and resources. So this is where we thought through our work in extension that we could really make some changes and work with the audiences that needed the help here, and just kind of be ultimately a needs assessment to help determine the work that we do in extension in Nevada. So some of the specific resources that we heard from these quotes were people needed agriculture specific stuff. So whether it's, help determining herbicide control for noxious weeds, just weed management in general. And then there's this person referred to being in a coaching group for farmers. So it's got an international scope, but then, they're getting some perspective from everywhere. And at the end of the day, regardless of where people were, they're all dealing with the same or similar type things. And so just being in a group and hearing that from people in other parts of the country and outside the country was helpful for this person.
What I noticed on this one is that California and some of the other states in our WRASAP, our western region of what do we have? 14 states and 4 territories, Lindsay, something like that.
Yeah, 3 or 4 territories.
Yeah, in WRASAP, some of them have a lot of organizations that offer agriculture specific resources, and some of us don't have so many resources that are agriculture specific, and those that are rich in resources have a lot more to offer in terms of helping farmers and ranchers with resiliency, and also the spread. If you were to look at GIS mapping and look at where they're located and how far they are from those resources, that would make a difference as well.
Yeah, and I do want to remind, in Nevada, we're about 80% federal lands. So that makes us really unique as well, that so much of our open spaces are federal lands. And while you can have grazing permits excuse me, and access to that, it does make it more challenging too, as Brenda alluded to. There's just a lot of wide open spaces and limited resources at times. Okay, so neighbors and community. So this, including faith groups. So this was important because we know that sometimes isolation can be a real problem. And people don't always speak the same language as you in agriculture. So, and again, like many of these cases, it either goes really well for people or unfortunately it doesn't go well. The first quote just talks about neighbors within a 2-mile distance. They're willing to help when they need it. And, same thing, a little community, but that's all they have. They don't really rely on a bigger population, and they're in the middle of nowhere. So they have to utilize their community of workers in this one. And then this person just says, the biggest strength they have is knowing that they're not in control. It's up to God, and He has the plan. It's up to Him, and it's not our strength. So a lot of people turn back onto their faith, and ultimately, that they are not in control of the whole process. So there's a lot of different positive takes on neighbors and community, and they can be beneficial, but we certainly did hear a lot of negative connotations too in regard to neighbors and community.
This is an interesting one because last week in WRASAP, the presentation we had was on faith groups, and they were talking about the guest speaker was talking about the decline in faith in America, in faith groups, I'm talking about organized religion, I should put it that way, in America. And they were also referencing the decline in organized groups at all, like in that book that was published some time ago, Bowling Alone, that was talking about the death of community organizations and how that impacts our ability to have groups to connect with.
Medical and mental health. So we know that, in addition to agriculture, people still have life to live, and it can be messy. So divorce, this person talks about support therapy or counseling, and, also having counseling for their kids that also went through this process. And then other people just go into their community, they talk to friends. So more of some of these resiliency traits. They didn't go to a professional or person like that, but, just trying to rely on some of their internal networks. And then just changing minds about seeking counseling. So we know in very rural areas or in Nevada, we see this a lot, is just the distance between locations and these small communities and small towns. Everybody knows everybody. People just aren't comfortable about going to see someone for help. So there's a lot of stigma around it. Somebody might see me there. And so, this last quote kind of talks about all that. Is we have vets for our animals, we go to a doctor, but there's still the stigma around mental health counseling and just asking for help from professionals that work on that. Coping, we've talked, if you choose to pull up some of our survey, we did ask people about their ability to drink and have other coping mechanisms. And this person just pointed out that they don't drink, which played into that, because that can attribute to some of the potential depression issues that people see. So just helping recognize an extension that people aren't alone. There are resources through our university. There's definitely those opportunities as well, and through some of the other agencies within the state of Nevada.
One of the things that we've been working on as we go, that also relates as we go into this next slide, whoops. We've been doing these outreach. Lindsay and I and 3 of our students have been presenting at these on stress at the Nevada Ag conferences. And on this last one, to reduce stigma, we thought we'd go for the mind-body connection, and we brought a physical therapist in to our program. And so we had the students do something that was more on breathing and mindfulness, and then we had the physical therapist working with, well, back issues or neck issues and trying to make those connections. And that seemed to help a little bit because they were connecting a little less stigma around some injuries and other kinds of physical issues. I think that maybe made the mindfulness and breathing exercises that were more psychological to be acceptable, a little bit more acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about this one a little bit already, but people just you get into agriculture and you enjoy it, even though there's a lot of challenges. And then it's just hard to leave it behind and to get out of the industry. And we know people do it. We heard from them here in the Western region, but there's a lot of people that do stay there despite the challenges and even the mental, physical, emotional toll on themselves as well. So the sentiment for the lifestyle is definitely a reality. Okay, so now a little bit more of a Nevada perspective on things. Brenda introduced these two kind of at the beginning and what this looks like, but we just want to dive in a little bit more on what this could be. And agriculture life, we've talked about working with the family, multi-generational, the balance that you have. And we're trying to intervene more before crisis happens. Brenda mentioned that we've really been trying to work with our agriculture partners around the state, Farm Bureau, Extension, some of our small ag and urban ag conferences, and just really letting people know that, there are resources here for you. There's people here for you. There's things that you can do before the crisis happens. Like hopefully it doesn't turn into a full-blown crisis and we can intervene. One of the areas that we're really looking at expanding on is coping skills for children, couples, and families. So we saw from some of the quotes that, the whole family is involved. And then if there's a divorce or something happens, it impacts the whole family. So what does that look like? The traditional 4-H model where you hopefully give the children some resources that they can take home and share with the family. And just how to make it a better family unit and less challenging for them as they eventually become adults and carry that on. External stressors, so content-specific education. We know traditionally where there's going to be some challenges, and can we intervene again to work on budgets and finances or animal health, whatever that is, through some of our education and outreach programming that exists. Again, working with our agency partners, Farm Bureau, cattlemen's groups, cattle women, some of those just to help manage more of these external stressors that we don't always have control over, that are decisions being made for us by legislation and policy, but that everybody has to react with. And then supports and resources. So through part of our outreach effort with Brenda and the graduate students, just reminding people that there is access to online mental health counseling. So if people are concerned about the stigma of meeting with someone in person, there's a lot of great resources to that online support. The early intervention, again, trying to intervene before the real crisis happens, for referral information from medical providers. And then support provided by community organizations, getting people involved in some sort of civic group, a faith-based group, their commodity groups. And I think, in Extension, we can all have parts of that is just trying to get people involved and, make them feel needed and wanted and special, and that they, what they have to contribute is important as well. And then the neighbors helping neighbors. If you see something, say something. Your neighbor hasn't been out in a couple days, which is odd behavior. It's time to stop by and see what's happening. And then finally, traits and adaptations, education to foster planning. Historically, agriculturists or planners, you're always at least a season, if not a year ahead. This winter we did this, next year we're going to make these changes, this breeding season, this is what it looked like, or we planted this, whatever that looks like, there's always some sort of plan. And can we help with budgets, marketing, some of those places where people just need more help sometimes on, am I going to be able to make this into a livelihood? Can I quit my town job? Can my spouse quit their town job? So there's a lot of places in Extension where we can help them work through some of those processes.
We have under strategies for financial planning. One of the programs that we have right now it's an apprenticeship program. And I like that what they're doing is they're taking people who have other jobs, but might want to do some urban ag. And so they're running them through an apprenticeship program. They're actually paying them to go through an apprenticeship program to learn about ag, to teach them financial planning, how to establish a budget, how to market their products, teaching them the ag skills that they need. And it's been really successful in their learning. They're just beginning farmers and ranchers, and they're not planning to do it full time, but they'd like to start the process of doing it on the side. And so they're new to the industry, and that's pretty exciting. Under the co-working, you can see I'm enthusiastic about this topic. I'll be quiet here in just a second. But under the co-working with families and the multi-generational part, one of the pieces would like to do next year is I do Gottman. It's a marital therapy approach, and one of the things we'd like to do is work with the Gottman cards and design cards for helping people in ag to know how to give bids to their family members. Like, what does a bid look like? To simple ways that you do something that tells your family member that you appreciate them, and have bidding cards for your children or for your partner, to help make sure that they are building a strong foundation in their relationships and not inadvertently taking their family members for granted, but make them ag specific, with permission from the Gottman Institute. So anyway, those are just some of the thoughts that we have. Let's see, I'm hoping that would love to learn from you about your region and any of this that fits or doesn't fit your context there, if you'd be willing to share your thoughts and ideas.
Brenda, there was one question that I see in the chat. What is inter-rater reliability? You talked about it in the beginning, and
Oh, yes. When doing qualitative, that's probably the wrong word. It's more like trustworthiness. But if you have three individuals, we give them, the method that we use is you give them each the same transcript. So I went through, I trained them all on how to do the coding. And then I had them code independent of one another, one sample transcript. And then I ran a rating to see if they coded the same. And when I finally trained them to the point where they were coding 90% the same, then I knew they were ready to code the real transcripts. So you want them, on the same, basically wanted to get them on the same page.
okay, someone asked if we got any qualitative data from Arizona producers.
Arizona is in our group, but they did not participate in the qualitative interviews. They're in WRASAP though.
Mm-hmm. Someone would like to, can you give a better example of the bidding cards from the Gottman?
Oh, yes, I'd love to. Okay, so I really think this is a fun idea. So in Gottman, they have love mapping cards where a card would be, so if you're doing it with a spouse, a card would be, what is your biggest stressor right now? And then I would answer that on behalf of my partner to see if I know what my partner's biggest stressor is. But if we were to make it, but a bidding card would be, you'd pull a card and you'd say, tell your child one thing they did on the farm well today. Okay, and so you just pull one at dinner, And then you'd pull one at dinner, and then you'd say, okay, on the farm today, I really liked that you got up at 6 o'clock and did your chores without me reminding you. And so the idea would be to take the Gottman love mapping cards and adapt them for ag. Take the concept and adapt it for ag, because bidding it's a marital construct. But what we found with bidding the partners that are in strong partnerships, they bid dozens of times a day. I mean, it might be just a pat on the shoulder. They bid automatically. It's a part of keeping a relationship strong. But people that tend to work all the time, like they're just so persistent in their work and task oriented, and you're working side by side maybe with your partner, it's easy to forget to bid. And as you forget to bid, then that structure that is your partnership can start to just fail a little bit. It erodes. It can start to erode because there's not enough bidding. Bidding is what keeps it strong. There's subtle things that we just do, like my husband locking the door when he leaves in the morning if I'm still in bed. It's a way to say, I keep you safe. There's small things that we do. And so the idea is a prevention idea to keep ag families strong, to remind them to bid just to keep the family strong. Does that make sense? I'm not explaining that too well.
Yep. No one, someone put a link in, but then they said it makes sense. They like it. Okay. Timothy says, I work with VR. Is that virtual reality? I'm guessing. And my region has lots of agriculture. I'm interested in getting information to people about what VR can do to help them continue to work if they've had a medical change or accident that has caused them to be unable to do their work.
And that refers to vocational rehabilitation, the state
Thank
vocational rehabilitation systems.
Yes. The joy of acronyms. Yeah, I think it's just whatever you have in your region. And I'm not sure where you're at, but different. So I mentioned in my bio that I'm a beekeeper, and they team us up. There's a program across the country called Hives for Heroes. And specifically, we work with military personnel and first responders. And so we do a lot of that as well. If someone's had some sort of injury or medical condition where they cannot lift the beekeeping hive boxes, there's different modifications that you can make to all of that. So I know it exists in other capacities of agriculture as well. I'm just not necessarily up to speed on all of that. So I don't know if others can help Timothy with this question, but okay, so you're in Oregon. Oh, sorry, that's a whole different question. Okay. All right, let's see. A two-part question. Did we have any expectations about what we'd find out with the survey, and what surprised us most when we analyzed survey results? Brenda really dug into their survey, so I'm looking at her to.
Yeah, I was surprised at a couple of things. One is, the suicide rate for women in agriculture is the same as the national average. It's about 14.5. So it's the same as the national average. It's older white men where we have the issues. But what interested me is that the stress level in our sample, now I'm not on our qualitative, I'm on our quantitative survey, was lower with the older white males. And my read on that, to the best of my ability, it surprised me at first because of the knowledge of the suicide rate. But my read on that is that people leave the field if they either get resilient to it and figure out how to problem solve and get accustomed to the flow of it and get pretty good at it. And then they took our survey, or they don't. They leave the field and such. Would be I couldn't find anything that was too specific in the literature to explain it, but the young new farmers were really stressed. So there was an age difference. There was also a gender difference. We didn't have enough to look at the racial differences, but I would have liked to have dug more into ethnicity and stress because of some of what's been published out of Colorado, for one, around, but there were some gender differences suggesting that women farmers had some higher stress levels, not in the suicide literature, but in our own survey, suggesting that they had some higher levels of stress, and there were some stories of discrimination, of differential treatment of women farmers in Western states. The other thing that surprised me is that some of I guess I had a stereotype that around online learning, around some of the, but while generally speaking, some of the older farmers wanted print materials, there was a high aptitude and interest in online mental health material and online information about farming and ranching. So as a delivery system.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the things that surprised me is when the graduate students got into doing the interviews, people wanted to talk. I think that surprised us all, as we thought they would be a very humble, stoic audience and they wouldn't want to open up. But the grad students talked about, once they got people talking, they almost didn't want to stop. So it just goes to show, sometimes that isolation or lack of community just isn't there for people. And, being a friendly listening voice is important as well. Okay, so this person says they are in Harney County, Oregon, which is very rural, mainly ranching, cows outnumber the people. Yes. I'm new to the position and find this extremely informative and would love to set up some programs, but not sure how to go about it. So our program contact that we worked with was Cassie. What's Cassie's last name, Brenda?
Bouska, Bouska. She's wonderful. She's out of near Ashland, Oregon.
Yeah, so let me find her. I'll put her in the chat for you because she's been doing a lot of ag stress type workshops and has had a lot of great success with it, teaming it up with some of her pesticide classes or other educational opportunities. So there's definitely those opportunities there too, as far as programming.
And like us, she's also been doing a fair amount of QPR training too.
Yep. And there's probably many others besides Cassie, but she's just who we've worked with on this project. Okay. Is the difference between data of men and women seen in attempts versus completed rates of death by suicide?
It's both attempts and completed. And here's what I've read, and I don't know that it's conclusive, but what I've read is the women have better that and I don't want to stereotype, so I'm saying it's not conclusive, but the help-seeking behaviors of women farmers and ranchers is better than males. So the willingness to seek help.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, for putting some of those resources there. Okay, Brenda, a comment came in to your point about higher stress and gender discrimination in female producers. This person participated in a series of qualitative interviews to explore that very thing in female producers living in Georgia and heard similar things. It's with Dr. Christina Proctor out of the College of Public Health at the University of Georgia. So I will copy that so we can look that up. We always send the grad students on trying to find data that would be helpful as well. So
thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, because we didn't have a large enough N of women in our study to be too conclusive on that. So I appreciate that.
Okay, that comes to, there's nothing else in the chat. I don't know if anything else came in, Paul, or anyone that's behind that we can answer or clarify better.
Ed, do you want to go ahead and share whatever was sent to you?
I can do that. Actually, the vast majority has already been covered. We did have a couple questions come in, and rather than trying to just share the slides, I will, if I can find them again, did have a couple of questions. And I think toward the end you alluded to this. How would you describe the overall willingness of producers to share their personal stories? And did you have many who were declined or were hesitant?
No, they were amazing.
Mhm.
They all said they were really busy, but then as soon as you got them on the call, they were, yeah, well, I should say we had to train the interviewers. So some of our interviewers were better at understood that you needed to develop rapport with the farmer rancher first. And as soon as they developed rapport with them and had a nice intro chat, then they opened right up on it. They were very forthcoming, and it helped. We had a pretty good protocol.
Mhm. Well, and to
Right.
follow up on that, as we've been doing more outreach at various ag conferences, this most recent hire of grad students that we've done, we've really had them tap into their agriculture roots. So some of them grew up in ag communities, some have families that were involved in agriculture. So we've really been trying to teach the counseling students to bring that in, because just their awareness of agriculture and their understanding of it, even at a small level, has been helpful. Just it goes back to that common ground.
Absolutely. Okay. Another one we had. Did you notice any general differences between responses from beginning farmers versus those with more seasoned experience?
I would say that the beginning farmers were more concerned with the finances. They were more concerned with the finances. The seasoned farmers seemed to have that figured out more, and they were more concerned with issues like government policies and trends in external environmental conditions, drought flow, because they had a more systemic viewpoint, a more of a long-term viewpoint, and they kind of saw the rolling of the financial part a little bit more. But that was frightening for the entry-level farmers.
Okay. We just had another one come in that went to everybody as note from Anna that found similar stresses in women farm spouses with a great deal of role stress, and provided a link to
Great.
some of their reports. So that's great.
Thank
That'll
you.
be in your
Thank
chat.
you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.
I'm going to copy that link.
Well, thank you, everybody that participated, especially Brenda and Lindsay, for sharing this important work. We appreciate all the insights you've provided. And again, we are planning to post our recording on the website if you'd like to review that. Thank you to everybody that contributed in the chat, and we'll keep that open if you'd like to check that for a few minutes. We are continuing to do these sessions through the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Center. And our next one later this summer, we'll be focusing on some of the voucher programs that are available for people to use to access counseling services in rural areas. So with that, thank you again to everybody, and we wish you a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.